Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may happen to be in the world, and welcome to No Depletes, Master Your Keystone. My name is Dan, and I'm joined once again by the fantastic Fem and the glorious Faithy. But yeah, let's jump straight into this one. Let's not delay any further, and we'll get into Spires of Ascension. The first pull itself is obviously one that's done. It's a pretty big pull in itself. Fem, do you want to run us through this one, because I'm sure you're quite familiar with this first pull that you're about to pull off here.
Well, there's 6 mobs. Usually when you pug it, you'll just do the first 6. You can bring in the Goliath, but that makes it much harder with kicks. So there's 3 types of mobs, I believe. There's the Mender, which needs a purge or a kick. There's the Castigators, which is the important ones. They cast an ability that Burden of Knowledge, which does a big dot on people, should be dispelled by the healer. And then there's the Vanguards, which does a tank frontal. They're not really that dangerous. They do hurt though on the tank, but it's a tank problem, you know?
Yeah, and of course, with it being a frontal, obviously melee, you want to make sure that you're not standing on top of your tank at all, really, during this pack. Those Vanguards, the frontal does hit particularly hard, to be fair, so you want to be trying to keep away from that one. This dungeon is quite notorious for frontals on a few of the mobs in here, but obviously we'll cover any other frontals as we go a bit further into the key. Would you say that normally you would commit lust to this first pull?
Yes.
Yeah?
Like, lusting this pull it gives you 4 good lusts in the dungeon, because by 20 minutes you should reach the second boss, which is a really good lust, especially on Tyrannical. So just throwing the lust out there on the first pull is very, very good.
Yeah, of course. After that first pull there, which you saw was lying behind the pillar so that, all the mobs would come and gather up quite nicely, you move on to the Goliath here. The Goliath is a very, very straightforward mob, especially if played on its own. You'll find in some groups maybe they will bring that Goliath in with the full pack as well at the very beginning, and with Lust it is very doable. But the Goliath does add problems of its own, giving another kick into the pack, along with 2 mobs that should already be kicked already between the Mender and the Castigator itself. The Goliath kick, if it does go through, it's pretty heavy group-wide damage and can easily cause a wipe if that is in with the rest of the pack. If it's on its own, there's never really a problem. 2 of those AoE casts and it goes into a recharge phase, where it will just do nothing, gain a shield, and start recharging its energy before it then tries to cast again. Just break through the shield and finish it off. Those mobs, again, on their own, not really that much of a problem. The Mender mobs, when they're dispelled, they do drop a weapon on the floor, which can be picked up by any melee whatsoever. And it just gives you a buff, which will basically deal even more damage on melee attacks over the next 5 melee strikes or 30 seconds, I believe, whichever comes first. Is it still possible to pick up that weapon before the key starts, or has that also been stopped like everything else in all of the dungeons?
That is still possible, but it's not really worth it.
Yeah, it doesn't exactly do a huge amount of damage, but it can be nice if you are able to get it off if you want to for whatever reason, even if it's just to feel a little bit cool. Moving on to the second pack here, you can see that the Mender on the right side has been CC'd. Faithy, do you want to explain why that Mender got CC'd there?
Yeah, so we again have a lot of mobs that require a lot of CC. We have the Goliath, which requires 2 melee interrupts, and we have the Castigator, which you'd like to keep interrupted for as long as possible, with the Burden of Knowledge and the Dark Lash, which both deals a lot of damage. And lastly, the reason for CCing the Mender is for saving that additional interrupt, which could be a little bit annoying if you don't have interrupt and CC and coordination in your group to be able to handle it off. Then getting that CC on the Mender is really good. And additionally, you will spawn a Prideful from just pulling these 4 mobs. So you can get the Mender in on the Prideful and just play it on top of the Prideful. So you have 2 mobs to hit on, and just making sure that you interrupt the Mender while doing the Prideful, and therefore it just makes it a lot safer by CCing it in the start.
Yeah, exactly. It's again just for the sake of getting an initial clean Prideful out. You can play both of these mobs together. The Mender, as Faithy said, it doesn't really do a whole lot in itself, and playing these 2 mobs together is not normally a problem. It's not standard practice to play any kind of mob with a Pride, but for a mob like the Mender here, which is more or less just tank damage and a heal, which is easy enough to kick, it's pretty simple. It's very, very straightforward. There's really nothing to worry about here. So As you can see, the first part of this dungeon in particular has gone pretty smoothly. You can see that this group in particular has chosen not to use Lust. The first pack luckily did die fairly quickly. Normally that would be the place that you would commit the Bloodlust to, but coming up to the first boss is also a decent enough place to get that first Bloodlust out if you do happen to miss it on the first pack or decide that it's not worth it. It'll just push back your Bloodlust later on into the fight, or into the dungeon rather, which it's probably not too bad as long as you definitely make sure that you have it up for the second boss, which we will obviously explain when we get there. But moving into the first boss, we have Kintara and her bird. Fem, do you want to take us through this one?
Yeah, she has a couple of abilities, most notably the overhead slash for tanks. It used to be a frontal. It's not a frontal. Tank or people do not need to care about where it is aimed. Also, I died. It also has the bird shooting out 3 balls that you see on the screen. That happens like regularly. You just have to avoid those. And it also has the line between the bird and the boss itself, which is basically like sharing their HP. So it doesn't matter which one you hit, and you should try to cleave them if you gain damage from it.
Yeah.
And that's pretty much it.
Yeah, exactly. And just looking at the reason why Fem died here, there were a couple of reasons behind his death. And we were talking about this yesterday when we were having a quick look through the videos initially. But you'll notice 2 things. So firstly, the line in between the two bosses itself, if you stand in it for too long, you do get a part of a stacking debuff, which is the non-dispellable one here. It does deal a rather significant amount of shadow damage, of magic damage rather. I don't know if it's shadow in particular, but it is magic damage all the same, so it's not easily mitigated. Taking 1 stack of that is deadly enough, even on tanks. So as DPS, you definitely don't want to take that. So melee positioning on this is very, 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 very specific on this fight, I suppose you could say. But with Fem taking 2 stacks, you can, if you watch his HP here, you can see it slowly burning down, and it just means that the next overhead slash that comes in, which he unfortunately didn't have any block for, it does mean that it does just kill him off. A little bit unfortunate, but it just shows you that it's very easy to get caught out by things like that if you're just trying to mindlessly follow the bird. Not saying you were being mindless, Fem, don't worry. But if you are just mindlessly following the bird, like a lot of melee DPS do tend to do, it can become quite fatal quite quickly. Luckily, that's not a frontal anymore, so you don't have to worry about that, but the dot itself is very, very rough. The boss itself can be reset just by running down the stairs, as being showed off by the mage here. But, you know, the group just releases, gets back to it, and they go and pull the boss yet again, which we'll just skip forward to here just to make sure that we're looking at it here.
Also,
yes,
something important I want to get out there.
Mm-hmm.
This frontal, or it's not a frontal, but overhead slash cannot be dodged by the tank. It can be parried and dodged, but you cannot physically dodge it. Yeah. People always ask me, why are you not dodging it? And that's because it's not possible anymore. It used to be on the beta when it was a frontal, but it cannot be dodged anymore. It's a targeted spell. So don't like tell your tank to dodge it because he can't.
What he's really trying to say is stop coming into Fem's chat and asking him why he's not actually sidestepping the frontal. Yeah. It cannot be done anymore. It is a fixated tank ability.
Yes.
But all the same, you know, even as a tank, don't try and dodge it. There's no point. You can't. It's the only thing that you can dodge for sure is the balls on the floor, which also do quite a lot of damage. So obviously make every effort to dodge those. Something else to mention here is that, as Fem mentioned, since the 2 bosses do share HP, you will want to try and keep the 2 bosses together at all times to maximize cleave damage. It will make the boss die faster. It will make the boss die a lot faster. I do see a lot of tanks who are too complacent and decide to just stand where they are for the entirety of a fight, and it is really annoying when what you want to do is cleave the boss and actually make sure it dies faster, which will help. You know, it will help your tank, as you probably will take 1 less tank ability maybe across that whole fight, which could be a lifesaver in the end. You never know. You never know. We're now going to be moving on to the next areas. So after the first boss, you come to an interesting decision. Spires of Ascension is split up into a left and right path. No matter which way you decide to go, both ways are perfectly viable. I think we agreed yesterday that the left side is probably overall easier to do. in a
Yes.
pug group, simply because there are probably less coordinated kicks that are required per pack. And I think the types of mobs across the left side as well, or at least how they're grouped up, is a little bit simpler as well. There's not very many scary pulls in particular. But something to mention, no matter which way you decide to go in your group, in the video here you'll see they go left, you do need to do one pull from the other side. So looking at this pull here, for example, they went to the right to do the one pull, which was the 6 stealth claws, which were stealthed around the room, and the 1 praetor, which was at the end of the platform. The stealth claws themselves are fairly straightforward. Like I say, they do start off stealthed. If you don't manage to catch them at the right time, if you're not pulling them out of stealth before they hit your tank will take a rather large stun, and they'll take a ton of damage. When they're stunned, obviously can't take any kind of, or can't mitigate any kind of damage other than their health and their armor. So there's no blocking, no parrying, no dodging, nothing like that, and it's likely to lead to a death. They do also put quite a nasty bleed on your tank. You'll have seen, if you've done this key at all, that your tank normally has to kite quite early into the pull, especially if pulling all 6 stealth claws at the same time. It ramps up very quickly, and it can definitely lead to the death of your tank in a pretty spectacular fashion. Lastly, inside of this pull is the praetor. The praetor is also a fairly straightforward mob. If the tank is in range of the praetor, it will just melee your tank. No big deal, nothing special about that. But it will charge away from your tank at on a cooldown. I don't know what the cooldown is exactly, but when it does charge away from your tank, if there's no tank next to it, or nobody with threat next to it, it will begin to cast an ability which will actually hit your tank pretty hard, the Dark Seeker. I believe it is only targeted on the tank, is that right, Fem?
Yeah, well, the threat target.
Yeah, exactly. So it does hit pretty hard. It is magic damage, so again, quite difficult to mitigate. But the whole idea would be just kill it off as quickly as possible and make sure that as a tank you're trying to stand on it as much as you can. If you're not feeling confident enough to pull all of the stealth claws into the praetor, because that can be quite a difficult pull, you can split it up into 2 pulls. Again, the timer in this dungeon is very, very forgiving, so splitting it up is absolutely no problem whatsoever. So once they clean up this first pull on the right side, they then move over to the left. And Faithy, do you want to run us through these mobs on the left side here?
Yeah, so as mentioned, when you play through Spires, you usually want to decide before you go, either you go left or right. As mentioned, as Dan said, the left side is the easier side and the right side the harder. However, you have to take the first pack on the opposite side before you move over to the side that you want to go. And being on the left side of Spires is the easier route. So that is what we're going to go through, as that is what we recommend for most part if you're new to the dungeon or not playing with full pre-mates, etc., etc. So on this pack here, we're seeing our first Skirmishers. Skirmishers is a mob that will hurl a spear at a target, and they will jump away. And the jump away can be super, super annoying, as the mobs can jump quite far and could, in theory, pull other mobs. So you have to look out for the Skirmishers doing, like, jumping away. So having the classes with grips, etc., is really good, or just keeping them stun locked and bursting them down is also really nice. You can also line the Skirmishers behind a wall and make all of them come to you, and then just play them like that to make sure they're always stacked. That is one way to do them. Usually, you just take them where they are, especially now that they fixed the pack on the left side, where it used to be bugged, and you were unable to pull them initially. But you should just play them in their place now, or you used to line them, and lining them is still a very, very viable option. And lastly, we have the Ether Divers, which is the bird-looking mobs, which is just an interruptible mob. Just interrupt it as much as possible, as it does do quite a bit of tank damage. And obviously, helping your tank with interrupting is always neat, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Something to mention about the hurl from the Skirmishers is that the hurl is not necessarily going to be on your tank. And the only time that they will cast the hurl is if your tank is not in range, which is another reason why them jumping away or effectively disengaging is even more annoying. You probably saw it just before, and I wanted to wind it back just to point it out. They will hurl at literally anyone who is in range at random. And unfortunately, the rogue gets absolutely destroyed by these Skirmishers. So Fem engages combat by charging in, it aggroes the whole pack. You see the 2 hurls go into the rogue, and he hits the deck in an instant. Literally Thanos snapped. It is It's a lot of damage. This is on a 15, so you can imagine that on a higher key, standard practice would be to pull these mobs back behind the down the stairs that you saw them come up just before, try and group them all up, and then try and keep them all together so that the tank has no problem with standing on top of all of them at the same time. If they were to jump away by doing that, the idea would then be for the tank to line them again. Only the tank needs to line them. That's what I found quite interesting. The fact that only the tank needs to line them, even though the hurl is a random cast. So that it kind of doesn't make any sense, but never mind. You know, it's fine. But it means that you as the tank have complete agency over this. You as the tank have complete agency over these mobs. It's 100% something controllable by the tank, which is more than ideal. More than ideal. We move on to. Sorry, yes, go on.
No. We don't move on. If we pause it here.
Sure, go for it.
If you, as the tank, you can actually control where the skirmishers will disengage, because they always disengage away from you, no matter So if you watch this, you will see me backpedaling slightly to try to line them up to get bounced into that thingy just to the left of my battle shout Vikar.
Yeah, just into.
I don't know if you can. Yeah, because if you just, as you can see, that one didn't jump very far, and if they don't jump very far, they won't hurl. So it's just something you can, min-max as a tank.
Yeah, it's effectively pushing them up against the wall so that they can't jump backwards, and exactly. That's obviously very good to mention as well. Moving on to the second Pride. Again, we'll run through it again briefly for people that may not have been here last week and still don't know what Pride does. The manifestation of Pride is a very simple mob. One spawns every 20% of trash count in a dungeon. They have two major abilities to look out for. First is Belligerent Boast, which are these lines that you see they're about to shoot out of Fem right now. They go in 4 directions. If they do hit anyone, then they get stunned and take quite a lot of damage. Outside of that, it is just general pulsing AoE damage, which ramps up as the Pride is alive. And it goes up to a maximum of 20 stacks for additional damage. And once it dies, everyone who is close by when it's dead receives a 30% damage and healing done increase for 1 minute, which is obviously very ideal for quite a lot of packs and bosses in dungeons. And 60% movement speed, can't forget that. That is actually also quite important. After that, they move on to our first squad leader. Now, squad leaders are very important, and I guarantee you that a few people will still be going into a pack like this and just happily AoEing and hoping that does damage. Squad leaders have a buff, which they give to their allies close by, which is a 75% AoE damage reduction. What's interesting about that is that it only counts for abilities that are AoE and not abilities that are cleave. Now, what that means is that an ability like, say, Blade Flurry, for example, is not lowered by that buff. Abilities that come from a warrior after whirlwinding as a fury warrior, so if you go whirlwind and then bloodthirst, the whirlwind will be reduced, the bloodthirst will not. So that's a very subtle distinction to be made between squad leaders, between cleave and AoE on the squad leaders. So AoE is a general AoE ability that's designed to hit all enemies without needing a target, and cleave usually needs a target and cleaves onto other mobs. So that's a very important distinction to make. So it is still worth it for a Fury Warrior to continue their normal AoE rotation, because they're still doing full damage to the mobs that are around the squad leader. Best practice in this pack, focus down the squad leader. Get rid of that mob first, just so that the other two lose their damage reduction buff, and that way you can kill those two off in perfectly reasonable time, and then move on to the next pack. Sorry, Faithy, go ahead.
Yeah, so as you were about to say, there is another mechanic from the squad leader. It does have another ability, which is a tank frontal, which you are able to dodge. So whenever it does the frontal, make sure that it doesn't go into a group. And as a tank, make sure that you dodge it, as it does do a lot of damage. Next to it, there's also another mob called the Champion. And the Champion is basically just a renamed Mender. It has pretty similar abilities. It has the Interrupt Heal, which you'd very much like to take, as you'd always like to interrupt a heal. And secondly, they have a weapon. However, the weapon on the Champion works a little bit different in the way that instead of only hitting the tank, it hits in everyone. So it's a lot more important to purge this weapon from the Champion than it would be from the Mender. Obviously, you like to purge both of them, but the Champion's weapon does do AoE damage, which is a little bit more scary. So if you do have a purge for it, do feel free to use it, and you can pick up the weapon to get some free damage instead as well. So that's really neat.
Yeah, absolutely. If you are a caster, please don't run over the weapons. You do need to be meleeing for the weapons to actually do anything, and I've had too many mages trolling me by finding the weapon and running over it, and then proceeding to swing with their staff. And it is really annoying. I would like to be able to pick that up as a warrior, I'll be honest with you. But all the same, yeah, no, that's absolutely right. They are there's very slight differences, but to all intents and purposes, they are basically a mender. Now, here's the thing about Spires of Ascension. We have more or less covered every single type of mob within the first 12.5 minutes of this key. From here on out,
there's Inquisitors.
That's why I said almost. So from here on out, it's very much a case of, exactly as Faithy just mentioned with the champion. The champion is basically, for all intents and purposes, a renamed mender. There are Inquisitors coming up, which are, for all intents and purposes, renamed Castigators. There are very, very, very slight differences, such as the renaming of abilities, but there's no massive tangible difference that means that you approach the mob in any new particular way. You'll see it as we move forward here. So again, we're going across the left side. We'll explain the route a little bit. So for example, you've got 5 Ether Divers. We've covered these already. They were in one of the previous packs. Want to try and get out as many random kicks on these as possible. The cast itself does leave a dot on the tank, so it can just be dispelled if many casts were to go through at the same time. But again, best practice, interrupt as many as possible, use AoE stops, things like Shockwave as you saw Fem do, Dragon's Breath as the mage did here, everything like that, just to try and make it as smooth as possible. They don't have a huge amount of HP, so killing them off is normally pretty swift, in all honesty. We are coming up to a second squad leader. In this pack, I believe there's a Stealth Claw in this pack, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right? Yeah, there it is. Found it. This pack itself can actually be quite dangerous. There's the Inquisitor, which, again, it is just a renamed Castigator. The dot that is placed on the dot that's placed on players is no longer called Burden of Doubt, and it's now called Infernal Strife. So it's basically exactly the same thing, though. It is a dot, and it just gets dispelled. It's pretty simple. Or you kick it. Best practice, you should just kick it. There's nothing else in the pack that needs kicking, so all kicks should be focused on the Inquisitor. But again, with there being a squad leader in the pack, you can't just go in and AoE everything down. Something that you'll see a lot of groups maybe try and do is CC 1 or 2 of the mobs, just to pull the squad leader out with maybe 1 mob, just to streamline things a little bit, make sure that the squad leader can be focused as quickly as possible, before then gathering everything up and just AoEing the rest of it down. It does make things a little bit cleaner. In fact, you'll see an example of something like that happening, or potentially happening later on. But we'll point that out when we come up to it.
If you only have 1 CC, like if you are the person with a CC coming up to this pack, I would highly recommend CCing the Skirmisher, because the Hurl is what's gonna kill people. You can play the Inquisitor because you can kick it, right?
Yeah.
But if you have 2 CCs, CC the Inquisitor and the Skirmisher while you're killing the squad leader, because the Skirmisher and the Inquisitor is what's difficult with this pack.
All right. So again, that pack gets taken down relatively quickly. As you can see, these keys again were also played this week. So the affixes we've got are Spiteful and Grievous, Every Melee's Worst Nightmare. I've absolutely hated playing keys this week, in all honesty, and it's made me want to gear my Shaman. So, yeah, that was just a little aside. But moving on, we've now got a stealth pack. I believe there's...
Point out the spear.
Yes, that is a very good point. Let's move on to that one. Did you have a Kyrian in this one? You did, didn't you?
Yeah, the Paladin.
It was the Paladin. Sweet. So just up the top of the screen here, you can see the spear. And since you brought it up, Fem, do you want to mention what this spear does? We will see it in action a bit later on in the dungeon, but if you want to quickly run through what it does right now.
It stuns all the affected enemies for 10 seconds, or 10 seconds when you put it down. If you drag a mob into it later, it has the same timer as all the other mobs. But it stuns them for 10 seconds no matter what mob, everything but bosses. And they take a 20% increased damage during this. So you will see it in action later. And there is one on the left and one on the right. And then there's one after the second boss. So no matter which path you take, there is a spear on on each side, and you are very likely to use them for one of the pulls on each side, because there are like more difficult pulls on both sides
Yeah.
that you will want to spare.
Yeah, exactly. You'll see, like I say, you'll see the spear come into use a little bit later on. I believe this one was used in the pack right before the second boss. But again, we'll point that one out when it comes through here. You saw the druid here. Actually, I just want to wind that back and point that out, because that was actually really good by the druid. The druid managed to get, I don't know if this was luck or skill or what, but
I don't know either.
The fact that he found this was actually insane. So what you'll see at the top of the screen in just a moment, the druid drops his trees and brings out the 3 cats out of stealth, which is actually amazing for the tank, because it means there's no threat of them getting stunned whatsoever. Other than that, it is almost just RNG, because this pack patrols, and it patrols across the entirety of this side of the platform. So that trees was actually insane. If you do have any kind of long-range CC, or if you're a hunter and you have flare, or if you're a demon hunter and you have spectral sight, try and find them and bring them out before your tank goes in. It just helps. It makes the start of the pull so much easier. And even 3 stealth claws, you can see Fem stood way back. You know, his warrior is not that bad geared now. He could realistically tank them, but it's still dangerous. It's still very dangerous. That dot will shred you in an absolute instant. So yeah, it was actually really good that the druid managed to bring that out. Very, very good indeed. So we're finishing off the pride here. Again, we all know what prides do. Gonna skip this forward just a touch to move on to the next pack. Everyone knows about the prides by now. Forced roleplay.
Also...
Let's talk about forced roleplay in dungeons real fast. Do you like it, Fem?
No, not
Excellent.
really. But, I mean,
Faithy, do you like it? Don't be muted, Faithy.
Yeah, don't be muted.
Yeah, don't be muted, Faithy.
Oh wait, I was muted.
Yeah, you were muted, sir.
Don't ruin my RP, man.
Yeah, it's so silly.
I really, it's not a good addition to dungeons, in my personal opinion. It's basically wasted time. You can't do anything about.
I mean, it does allow you to recharge cooldowns, right? And I assume Blizzard has included the RP time in the timer.
Oh, you would hope so, right?
Yeah.
You would hope so.
So, like, it can be good. It's just annoying.
Yeah. Did you have a point that you wanted to make just before, Fem?
Yeah. If you... I can rewind.
You can rewind it, so you have that kind of power here.
Okay, if we pause here, as you can see, we hit 60%, 0.7. That doesn't matter. And got the pride on this platform. And this comes back to, I believe... Wait, I can't do this. Because it comes back to all the way back here on the pull, way back here.
Bear with me 1 second.
Here. The 6 stealth claws and the 1 praetor. If you do not include this 1 praetor, you will then get the pride on the next pack, right?
Mm-hmm.
With the 5 cats as soon as 1 mob dies.
Yeah.
So that's why, you should include that praetor here.
Yeah.
Because that way you will have a much better pride.
There was
a safer pride.
Yeah, there was a time where a lot of standard practice was to do the 6 cats only without the praetor. Yeah. But as Fem mentioned, it does cause very awkward prides as you go deeper into the dungeon. It's the same thing that we discussed last week. It's a case of when it comes to you making routes for your dungeons, you cannot just take each 20% on its own and just assume that that's all that you're going to need. You have to think about how is getting 20% here going to affect where I get, maybe the 80% pride or the 60% pride. Yeah. A lot of that will matter. So there's definitely a little bit more thought required. I think the prideful affix has definitely been good when it's come to actually making routes. The whole process has been a little bit more in depth. It's very similar to reaping, obviously, but reaping was very I suppose with reaping, it didn't matter what came after the reaping when you procced it. It just mattered what you were doing at the time or what you were in between, making sure that you hopefully weren't fighting anything particularly dangerous when you had all these ghosts come at you and so on. But with Pride, it's basically reaping, but one step further. You want to think about not only what are you fighting at the time, but what have you got coming up? Is there a particularly hard boss that you've got coming up, like the second boss in Spires, for example? Or is there a particularly hard pack coming up? Would you really want pride for that moment. These are all things that you can consider when you're looking at making routes of your own. But ultimately, you know, ultimately, you can still just make a route that gets you 100% by the end of the dungeon and just play it that way. In a 15, the pride usage won't be super vital, but everything to help, you know, everything to make things just that little bit smoother. There are definitely certain points where you want the pride in particular. Fem, I know you're dying to talk about this little moment that you have just here, because I know you mentioned that yesterday. So you want to take us what you're going to do in this moment?
Yeah, so basically right here, you can see there's one patrol right on the right, and then there's a Goliath and 3 birds in the middle pack. But if you want to play this safe, you can play those 3 birds without the Goliath, which I'm gonna do. And you just have to, you can do this either by pulling the left bird or the middle bird when they are far away from the Goliath. So you're gonna see me do that. I'm gonna actually wait for the bird to walk away from the Goliath here. And this is just because playing this together and then accidentally ninja pulling the patrol might be very, you know, scuffed, and it might lead to a wipe. So you can just do this safely and just play the 3 birds and then skip the Goliath, because the Goliaths are not good. They're just very they have a lot of health. They have their shield. They have their kicks. They're just annoying.
Yeah, exactly. They are also probably the one mob that's the most likely to cause a full wipe very quickly. Everything else is normally pretty easily dealt with. Goliaths, if they're not handled properly, they will just wipe your group and cause a big time loss, which is less than ideal. But yeah, I actually didn't know that those mobs weren't linked together. When Fem showed me that yesterday, I was pretty impressed by that. I like it when there are different pull iterations and you can actually pull a pack apart. I feel like that should be standard practice for Blizzard as a whole, and they should just not link packs and see if you can find creative ways to pull a pack apart and take certain mobs out of packs. And I think that would add quite a lot to route variation and what have you. I think that would be pretty cool if they did something like that going forward. I don't think they will by any means, but. No. You know, all the same, it's nice to hope, you know. In this patrol, again, it's all mobs that we've seen already. Squad leader with the AoE damage reduction, Inquisitor with the 2 casts that need kicking, and a champion with a weapon that needs dispelling, and a heal that also needs kicking or also dispelling. It's all basic stuff. We've seen it all already. This pack, again, because the 3 ether divers were dealt with beforehand, you can now take this pack safely on its own, and you can just skip past the Goliath by hugging the wall, as you can see on the screen right now. Yeah, a nice little route iteration there, which I definitely will be taking into keys going forward, because I did not know that was possible, and I've had groups, whenever we've gone left side, I've had groups playing that Goliath pretty much every single time. So being able to not take that will obviously be quite helpful going forward, which is very nice. So now we're coming up to a pack right before the second boss. Now this is where the spear is going to be used. We'll see that in just a moment. But what you'll find here is that this pack is more or less the same on the other side. There is a distinct difference. I can't remember what that difference is. Isn't it a stealth claw?
Champion, the other side has Inquisitor.
Right, yeah, exactly. So it's the type of mob that needs to be kicked, basically. Would you say that the other side would be more difficult than this side purely because of the Inquisitor? Yeah,
for sure.
Under normal circumstances, what you'll find a lot of groups doing is they will CC as many of the mobs as possible. You can see it's the champion, I believe, that's been sheeped up in the top of the screen, just up here. Under normal circumstances, yes, you would normally have 1, 2, as many of the mobs CC'd as possible, pull the squad leader out, finish that off as quickly as possible, and then go in and AoE everything else. Fem decides no. And just gets himself in there, as you can see. But it's not that bad, because as you can see, the paladin picked up that spear that we were talking about before, pops it down, and there it is. There's the spear which Fem was talking about just a moment ago. There's the debuff on them, 10 seconds stun. Everything's taking less damage. Now, the one issue with using a spear on this pack, for example, and not on an earlier pack, is that the squad leader is still reducing AoE damage. So even though the spear is down to make the whole pull easier, which is fair enough, that that stun is going to break, and the pack's still going to be relatively healthy. We'll roll it on, and we'll see roughly what HP they're on at the point that the stun breaks. So you got 3, 2, 1. Stun breaks. Squad leaders at 80%. Squad leaders at 45%. Everything else is at around 80%. There is a pull on the right, which is rather large, but can be killed off if you have the damage to do it. I believe you might even have lust around that point as well if you lust the very first pull.
Yeah.
The one that I'm thinking of. But again, we're not doing the right side, so I can't really show that off properly. But if at any point you catch any of the three of us doing keys during a week, if you see us in a Spires of Ascension, chances are we'll go right, and you'll be able to see that pull. It is quite a magnificent pull. I do really enjoy that one as a DPS. But again, so you can see this pack in particular, it really is trucking the group pretty hard. Fem himself taking quite a lot of damage here as well. But all in all, you know, they deal with it perfectly fine. That 10 seconds that the spear affords is quite good. It is quite a game changer. It does certainly help things along in a very, very steady fashion. Moving on to this pride just before the second boss, and then we do have the second boss, who is easily the hardest boss in this dungeon. And Faithy, do you want to run us through that one?
I will. First of all, with this pack taken into mind, we do use Spear here. The main reasoning being that this is probably one of the most difficult packs in the entire dungeon that you will play, especially if you go on the left side, which we do. If you go the right side, there's a lot more difficult packs where you could end up using Spear. But usually, if you do have a Spear, do always use it here. Do commit cooldowns. These mobs are very, very scary, especially when there's so many of them. And if you play all of them at the same time, you do really want to commit cooldowns, offensive, defensives. Don't be greedy with it. You have a pride to reset cooldowns on. But next up, we're getting into Ventunics. And Ventunics is, well, it seems like an easy boss, and the idea of the boss itself is pretty easy. What this boss does is that it does an ability called Dark Strike that will jump to the furthest range player and leave a pool where he have recently stood. I think it's the range players, right? Or is it a random range player?
It's a random range player.
It's a random range player, yeah. What this pool will do is that it will emit an orb going in an inner circle. The boss does die really quick here, as you can see in this group. But basically, you will have these orbs going in a circle, and you'll have to dodge them. What you'd like to do is that you'd like to get 2 dark strides on top of each other, so the orbs become easier to dodge when you pull the boss away for his intermission, which I'm not sure we'd actually see. But the boss has an intermission where the orb spawns a lot more frequently. And by going as Fem does here, and he have now placed 2 of the pools at the exact same location, he's now pulling the boss away. And it's a lot easier for the players to be able to see the direction of the orbs, when they're coming and where they're coming from. And that is pretty much like the main mechanic of the boss. It's basically making sure that those pools are spawned next to each other, and then taking them away before the intermission. So it's a lot easier to dodge, and you'll still be able to do damage to the boss. And it's a lot easier to dodge these orbs, basically, because these orbs does a tremendous amount of damage, and getting hit by them won't be lethal in a 15 necessarily, but it will definitely chunk your HP quite a bit. It is also nice to mention that when he jumps on the range player, they do get a dot that do quite a lot of damage. So just make sure that you deal with that as a healer. But those are the 2 mechanics, I reckon, right? Is there one more?
Yeah, no, that's basically
it. There's Blinding Flash, but...
Yeah, there's Blinding Flash, which is a very, very easy to see frontal, which is a very small frontal as well. So just step to the side. It always focuses the tank. So yeah, just don't be in front of the boss, basically.
Yeah. As Faithy mentioned, something really good that Fem did here, and it is, again, talking about standard practice for your tanks, is trying to make sure that the zones that are left on the floor are from Dark Stride, trying to keep the boss on top of the previous zone. It actually makes it easier for melee to dodge as well as your range. Being able to see all of the orbs coming from the same area is really underrated in terms of making this boss significantly easier, especially if the intermission was to come. This group has some absolutely insane damage inside of Pride and Lust, so you don't see the intermission here. But again, trying to keep both of the zones exactly on the same place where possible, definitely worth trying to do that as much as possible. They don't have to be exactly on top of each other. Fem has done this a lot, which is why he's able to do it without much effort. But even if they're just next to each other, it's still fine, as long as they're close enough that you're able to basically have a good view of both of them when the intermission comes. It's very worthwhile. Very worthwhile.
Also,
yes,
I've paused the video here.
You have.
Because, yes, it's very important. Or well, it's not really.
Sure.
But it's something to know. The Dark Stride pool, the first ball that comes out of the thing is going to be aimed the same way the boss was facing. So as you can see, if we rewind like a couple of seconds, I'm faced one way with the boss, right? The first Dark Strike comes out, the first ball is going to spawn that way, like this way that we have on screen right now. And you can force that every time to sync up the balls shooting out of the rift or whatever it is.
Okay.
So on the second one, the first one has gone full circle. So if you aim it the same way, again, they're both going to sync up, and that's going to make the intermission a lot easier as well.
That is something I did not know.
Everything will have the exact same direction.
That I didn't know. And that I've been looking to start tanking more keys fairly soon, hopefully. So that's definitely something that I'll be taking forward. That's actually really good to know. I didn't know that was how that worked. And the timing on it seems to be really good as well. By the time the second Dark Stride comes in, the balls have completely rotated.
Exactly.
So it is actually perfectly lined up. You're a very smart man, Fem. You're a very smart man.
Yes, indeed.
But second boss goes down fairly quickly. That boss, it is kind of important to have Pride and Lust for that boss. Every Dark Stride, the dot that Faithy mentioned that goes on your range, it hits really hard. Even on Fortified, it hits very hard. If you have one range, they're going to be taking that dot permanently. It is pretty rough. You definitely want to try and commit some defensive cooldowns to that where possible. But the boss goes down, everything's pretty smooth going forward, and now we move on to the Hellion, which normally wasn't played a whole lot until fairly recently, honestly. It started being added a little bit more into a lot of routes. But the Hellion, it's a straightforward mob in terms of what it does, but it's very, very deadly. It has an aura debuff. You can see the orbs that are being shot out towards players, which is completely unavoidable. 100% unavoidable. So you've got, let me just get this up here. You have that one there going that way, that one there going towards the mage. It is just part of his aura damage buff. It hits incredibly hard. Your healer will probably need to commit something here, maybe if that mob's going to be alive for a while. You can normally assume that mob is going to be alive for a significant amount of time, especially if the second boss has died fairly quickly like it did in this group, because you will not have that many cooldowns going into it. Outside of that, similar to the squad leaders, it has an impact cast, which is, again, just that dive bomb mechanic, which leaves the zone on the floor, which you don't want to stand in. Definitely a mob to take seriously. If you do have cooldowns going into it, start attacking it. Start attacking it, pop all your cooldowns, make sure that it dies as quickly as possible to help your healer out here. Very, very important. The pathing that we take going up here is to skip some of these packs that are right in the middle. Faithy, do you want to run us through this little skip here?
Yeah, so basically what you want to do here after you deal with the healing is that if you hug the very right side of this pillar, you'll be able to go out on the outskirts, as was shown here by Fem. You go out by the outskirts, and you're going to go all the way around, and you're going to drop down, and basically just completely skipping the pack that you've just seen skipping. This is due to the Warden, Goliath, and Hellion together is an insanely difficult pack, especially with the anima field on the ground, which buffs the mobs and makes it even more difficult. So you always want to skip these mobs. They're super, super hard to deal with. They take a lot of time, and they're very, very lethal. So you want to go out of your way, you go out here, and you can simply just drop down, and you will not be in combat with them, and you can move away. Next up, there's another anima field, actually two anima fields, together with the Goliath, a Justicar, and Warden. And this pack is also one of the more scary packs in the dungeon. And you'd prefer just always skipping it with either invisibility potions, which we would always recommend having a stack of in your bags at the very least. There's a lot of dungeons where invisibility potions could be very, very good and helpful for you. So this is a place where you could use it. However, Fem's groups do have a rogue. So what they're going to do is that they're going to shroud pass, I think. You can also just go up close to the what's that called? Like the
ledge?
Yeah, the ledge here. If you have CC the closest warden. So if you have a full CC on the closest warden, you can go on the ledge and you can just jump up and you don't have to use like a shroud or an invis potion, etc., etc. What you can also do is you can have a warlock gate up or another stealth class, just stealth pass and mount up on a mount, and you can just jump in on their mount. There's a lot of ways to skip this pack, but we would always recommend skipping it as it's just not worth your time to play it, and it's very difficult, basically. Don't want to play it too much.
Yeah, the Goliath in that pack, until it gets kicked, it just spam casts its fist, its massive AoE ability. So that thing will wipe you in a hurry. There's a very good reason why that pack is skipped. The Warden has a massive heal which needs to be kicked. The Chustakar is basically an Inquisitor on roids more than anything. It hits incredibly hard and does spam cast quite significantly. It's a very dangerous pack. It is skipped in every group and with very good reason. Those mobs, if Blizzard ever want to see those be played, they need to be nerfed in some way. It's very, very deadly. We have a very small pack of Usurpers here, about 6 Usurpers, which are basically just Skirmishers from before, but they don't leap. They have a hurl ability, they're exactly the same as the Skirmishers themselves do. You're just looking to pull them, line them behind this pillar here, same thing as before. They can hurl on the move, which makes them different from the Skirmishers. So whereas the Skirmishers before, they would only ever look to cast their hurl if they were able to see the tank and the tank wasn't in range. But if they can't see the tank, then they won't cast anything and they'll just continue to move towards the tank as brainless as they are. But these Skirmishers, or these Usurpers, will cast hurl on the move, so I wonder if we see any of them doing it at all. No, because the Shroud was used to get him, but if anyone was visible at that point, they would have just started casting hurl regardless. They don't need to have sight of the tank, they just need to have sight of somebody, and they will start casting hurl at you. So if you don't have a rogue, something that you can do is you can have your tank do what Fem's doing here and just run through on his own. You don't need the Shroud. There is enough room for you to be able to run next to the pillar. I'll show you which pillar here, actually. So there's enough room to be able to run next to this pillar here. If you just take this route up and hug that pillar, you are lining this warden here, so he will not aggro to you, and you're far enough away from the warden on the right side so he won't aggro to you either. Your tank can run through here, pull all the Usurpers, line them himself or herself, and then everyone else can move in afterwards when the Usurpers have no line of sight of you. They don't melee particularly hard, so your tank should survive that on their own. But it's definitely a safer way to pull just in case you don't have a Shroud, so nobody gets hurled to death in a very, very unfortunate incident. But once everything is all grouped up, you can see actually during this pull that the mage drops a Ring of Frost to make sure that everything's stacked. If you have watched Best of Method number 8, you'll see that Fem really doesn't like it when Rings of Frost get broken early. He really doesn't like that in the slightest, so if you ever have the privilege of having Fem tanking your key, don't break rings early. But you can see that the ring is used just to help gather everything up, quickly AoE it down, a few CCs thrown in here and there just to make sure that it's all clean and above board. The pack itself, again, they don't have much HP. They die in an absolute instant.
Yeah. Quickly to mention, as you mentioned, they're pretty similar to the Skirmishers. The one difference is that they can throw on the walk while they're walking, and they don't jump away. They do not jump away from the tank, like these Skirmishers does. But outside of that, they're pretty similar, right?
Yeah, exactly. Basically the same mob, just with some very slight subtle differences. And now we're moving on to Orifrion, which has a very interesting little mechanic that the tank can push forward. Do you want to take this one, Fem?
Sure. So Orifrion does have a couple of mechanics, notably Imperial Ordnance, which is this big thing where everyone gets an arrow above their head and can drop a pool. He does all of his mechanics, and they cost energy. So if you look at my target frame, you can see right now he has 40 energy right down there on the right. And each ability costs 5 per target. So each Imperial Ordnance costs 25 energy for him because he puts it on one each group member, right? And he has Purifying Blast, which is a like single target dot thing for the healer to heal. Also costs 5 energy. And also Charge Stomp, which also costs 5 energy. And when he gets to 0 energy, he will go into this recharge anima phase, where he takes increased damage, as well as he sucks all the balls from the Imperial Ordnance back into him. If they reach him, I think they heal and do damage. I've never actually let them go through.
They deal a lot of damage.
Yeah.
It's actually insane.
Yeah, as you can see on the screen, we have our Paladin bubble soak them. But if you do not have an immunity, like we had Paladin and Rogue and Mage, but if you don't have one, you can just have your tank soak all of them. Also, something I hate seeing is when people do exactly what the Paladin did and run away from the boss to soak the balls. Just stand in front of the boss, hit the boss, because he's taking increased damage. So you're losing out on a lot of damage by running away from the boss and not hitting him. That's just a pet peeve. Also, as you can see on the screen, I am like walking under the boss every now and then. After every Purifying Blast, basically, if he sees the tank under him when his Charge Stomp is off cooldown, he will immediately use it. But if I stand like max range, he won't always immediately use it. So I do this to force the recharge anima phase faster, because it costs energy, right? And the faster you get him to 0 energy, the faster he goes into the damage phase.
Yeah.
So that's why you see me doing that. And also, I have to say, don't stack the Imperial Ordnances in melee. It's really bad. As you can see right there, what happened was he did the Imperial Ordnance straight into Charge Stomp, and people got cleaved because they were in melee. Just stack on a range with the arrows. It's much better.
Yeah, you'll usually find that a range might be pre-marked, especially in more coordinated keys. Maybe not in pugs, but in more coordinated keys, a range will be marked. Everyone will just run to them with Imperial Ordnance and then scatter before the boss can do any more abilities once everything's landed. Something to mention is that when the orbs are being soaked, they actually splash. So if you do have a mage that's blocked behind the boss, or a paladin who is bubbled behind the boss, and they're not moving out to soak the balls like Fem advised not to do, move away from them in a hurry, because they will splash and they put the dot that they leave on everybody. And that dot does hit particularly hard. Even if the tank's soaking them, if the tank soaks all of them, he will start to take a lot of damage. It's actually... unless you're a demon hunter, but we all know why that is. But they do take a lot of damage. It is pretty rough, but yeah, like I said, just try and move away from it, or move away from whoever's soaking. That is the more important thing, because it is quite rough. After Orifrion, we now move on to the 3 mini-boss angels, which, since there are 3 of them, we will explain one each, and I'll go first, because it's the easiest. So we have the one in the middle, which is Lachesis. Lachesis is very, very straightforward. It is a aura-wide, or group-wide damage taken increase, I believe, which is exactly what it says on the tin. It's just everyone who's in combat with Lachesis takes increased damage, but the only other ability that she has at this moment is a frontal cleave, which is avoidable by the tank. There's nothing else to this. There's nothing else to this mini boss at all. Diminuendo, as you can see right there, goes in front of the mob, splits out into 3. The tank can just sidestep it, and it's all good. There's no panic with that mini boss at all. Something to mention about each of these mini bosses is that when one dies, its power gets absorbed by the remaining angels that are alive. So now when we move on to the next one, Astronos, not only will everyone now be taking increased damage, but she has an extra ability, which is the Charge Spear, if you want to go through this one, Faithy.
So Charge Spear is a spear that she will throw on a player or at a player, and the spoiler will be there. You'll obviously walk away with it, and when the spear lands, a spear will spawn, as you can see. How the spear works is that it will go in a cross. It will do 4 swirlies depending on from where you see. So you can see Fem here showing off, right? With the spear facing into the ground like that, it will go in each one direction. So it will go straight, it will go backwards, and it will go left and the right from where the weapon is into the ground, right? If you follow the edges of the sword. And that is how you can always pre-position yourself, knowing where the lines will go, as the lines hits very, very hard and you don't want to stand in them. So how you usually deal with this is that you get a few of them close, or one of them, and then you pull the boss a little bit further away as you have a lot more space to dodge them, while also doing the frontal for the tank, so he just has a little bit more space. Obviously, Fem showcasing it here, so you can see how exactly they work. So now we have 2 spears down, and we're just taking it away. It's going to give way more spot, like leisure, and you can see the lines coming at you a lot more easily. So you don't necessarily need to look at the spears and see where they will go immediately if you do pull them far away. However, if you're very close to the spear, it's very nice to know. As you can see, the druid is swifting left and right a little bit and soaking 2 of them and almost dying. It does do a lot of damage, especially with the damage increase aura being there.
Yeah, and something that Fem actually showed off during the pull is that, and this is also something I didn't know, but if you stand in the middle of the spear, it looks like you don't take any damage from the lines, but as you can see when the spear is on the floor, there is actually a zone around the spear which will do steady ticking damage to whoever's inside of it. So I suppose if your healer was feeling particularly confident, maybe you could stand in there, but there's really no need to, especially when there aren't that many spears up. They are quite easy to dodge. Just be, you know, on one of the corners, so to speak, of the spear, and you've got no problem with dodging any of the lines, as Faithy mentioned just there. But once again, Astronos, so as long as you can dodge lines, it's not a massive deal. You know, again, the damage taken increase. If you do get hit by one of the lines, it is going to hurt. But, you know, as long as you can actually dodge projectiles that are coming towards your face, then there's no big issue there. Astronos goes down, and then you move on to the final of the 3 angels, who is particularly nasty and probably the single hardest mob in any dungeon in Shadowlands so far. What's her name? Clothos. And Fem, do you want to take us through the extra bit of Clothos?
Well, Clothos, obviously, if you do her third, which you should, has absorbed the other 2 angels' abilities. So she does do the spear, and she does do a frontal. However, her frontal works kind of differently, because she does the Hellion kind of leap and then frontal directly after that. But her ability, which is why you leave her last, is a ticking, stacking dot. You can see we have 8 stacks of both the damage taken increase as well as the dot. So that's why you leave her last, because if you that dot does a lot of damage. If you would start with this one, then you would have that on all of them, and that would suck. So that's why you leave her to last.
Yeah, considering that you do have the damage taken increase ramping up at exactly the same time, you know, it does do a lot. Quite more often than not, you'll find that the second Kyrian spear, which you saw used on the pack before the second boss, the second spear that you pick up, no matter which route that you take, you will always use it on this final mob here. You'll also commit lust to this mob, and you won't lust the last boss, simply because there's no need to. The boss has very distinct phases, which we'll cover in a moment, but look at the group's health right now. It's just steadily tanking. Grievous makes this even more difficult. It is an absolute nightmare. Realistically, Mage probably should have bloodlusted there, but they managed to do it without, which is a great testament to the group and the healer. But yeah, you just want to try and get that mob killed as soon as possible, so commit everything to it. All CDs, the Bloodlust, the second spear if you've had someone to pick it up, everything. Just make sure that mini-boss dies as quickly as possible. And then last but not least...
Did you show where to pick up the spear, by the way?
I didn't actually. Should we... Let's quickly go back and double-check on that one, just so that we can see it. Let me find exactly where it is. That's where we fight Orifrion.
I'm going again.
Let's see... all the way back to about here. It's just before the Hellion.
Yeah.
We'll get there in just a sec. Here we go. Hopefully you bring MDT down. There.
Yeah.
So you can see it just on the side, just here. It can be quite easy to miss once you know it's there, then there's no issue. But it can be quite easy to miss since it's off to the side. It's kind of the same with the other spears earlier in the dungeon. They are purposely off to the side, but they do have a little glow around them. They're supposed to stand out, but more often than not, they don't. I've had multiple times where pugs have skipped over spears, and I've forgotten about them as well, so I've not been able to correct them. It's less than ideal, but there's your second one, which again, that is the one that no matter which side you go, you are guaranteed to be able to pick that one up, and that is the one that you would use on Clothos as you go onto the final platform. And we'll just skip back forward to Clothos's death, and the death of the Pride. Away, Pride, we don't want you. And now we can move on to the final boss, which is Devos, who is, honestly, not that bad, really. I think Devos is incredibly straightforward. She has a couple of very, very basic mechanics. The first is a targeted charge called Run Through, which is just a relatively long cast, at which point, when the cast finishes, she charges forward and deals damage to literally anybody that is in her path. You can see on the floor right now, there is a zone which she is channeling into. This is her other ability, Abyssal Detonation, this one right here. Abyssal Detonation, you can see the cast on her as well. When that goes off, it will pretty much kill anyone that is not inside of this very faint blue bubble here. Just make sure that you're inside that blue bubble as much as possible when you see that it's up. There is no need to be scared about dragging Devos into that, because the only damage that bubble reduces is specifically from Abyssal Detonation, which she doesn't take damage from anyway. So, you know, if you ever see your tanks being a bit scared and tanking her on the very outside of the bubble, it doesn't need to be that precise. You can drag her into the bubble and she will still take full damage from your group. That's not a problem. She has 2 intermission phases, which you will probably have to correct me here, Fem, but I believe 66 and 33?
70 and 30.
Why do they keep changing this in every boss?
But also, the 71 can come earlier if you have low DPS. Like
because it's time-based.
On a timer as well, yeah.
Okay, do you know what the timer is?
The 30... no, I
right.
haven't figured that one out yet, because we usually push it. So.
Fair enough. Not to worry. So 70% and 30%. At which point you get the intermission, which you can see right here. I'll wind it back just a little bit so we can show off the orbs. All she does is channel into the spear that's in the middle of the room. It's a little bit of free DPS time, just to properly min-max it. At which point she flies off into the open area out the back of the, or out the front of the room, and she spawns these orbs, of which there are 5, so 1 each. The idea of the intermission is to pick up the orbs, and take them into the spear in the middle to effectively recharge it. You can see everyone going to pick one up, everyone runs into the middle to drop it off, and then the idea is to have someone, anyone, doesn't necessarily have to be the tank, but usually is, to click on the spear, and then you get this little mechanic here. So, as Devos is flying around, she'll fly from left to right. I don't believe it's alternated. I think it's completely random which way she moves and how far she moves. But the idea is for you to throw the spear into Devos to bring her back down. It also does deal a bit of damage on its own, just to push the next phase a little bit faster. Don't miss the spear.
I did this intentionally, by the way.
Oh, yeah?
When I picked up the spear, right, you could see my camera angle. Rewind it.
Sure.
You can see right here. I am not looking at Devos right now, right? Technically, I could be looking at Devos because she only moves every now and then. Yeah. But now I waited because I did not look at Devos. In the next one, you will see me looking at Devos, seeing her move instantly, picking up the spear and shooting. Like she only moves every like 10 seconds or so. If you trust yourself, to do it, and you have a lot of mobility, so you get your orb in first, or even as you're taking the orb to the spear, because as you notice during the intermission, I'll point it out on the next one, there are zones on the floor that move as well, which also leave a stacking dot if you do happen to stand in them, but it's also the same dot that you get during the intermission phase itself while she's flying around. But it doesn't do a whole lot, in all honesty. The faster you get through the phase, the better it is for the healer anyway, even if you pick up 2 or 3 of the debuffs. So ideally what you could be doing is, once you've picked up the orb, you know where the spear is. It's in the middle of the room. You roughly know where that is compared to where you are. So you can run and be looking at Devos at the same time just to see if she's moved. And if you see that she's just moved, so like Fem now, for example, he turns the camera, sees that Devos has just moved, so he doesn't need to wait for her to move again. There's no fear of him actually missing the spear. He's able to throw it instantly and end the phase a little bit sooner, which is actually really good, just to avoid any extra stacks of that debuff, in particular on an affix like Grievous, where
group-wide damage is a little bit more deadly anyway. The remainder of the fight, exactly the same as it has been already. Standard stuff, run through, Abyssal Detonation. It's just a case of finishing her off just like that. Again, Spires of Ascension, pretty damn forgiving on time. There were 9 deaths in this key, which isn't a whole lot, but I've certainly had runs where there's been more.
First boss, so.
Yeah, there was that full wipe on the first boss, which is obviously, it was Fem's fault anyway, because he died.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly forgiving key. It's slowly become one of my favorite keys. In all honesty, it's one of those ones that I think it can be a lot more difficult in a pug, but really, really easy in a coordinated group, because there are a lot of important kicks that you need to actually take care of. But if you've got a way to assign all of those, it's so as anyone in a group, for example, you don't have to be the. I think there's something I want to talk about as a little side topic, actually, very briefly. I think there's this kind of there's some incorrect thinking that the tank has to be the one to completely designate everything, whether it be in a coordinated group or in a pug. That's not the case. You don't have to be the tank to coordinate everything. The tank can make a route that they're comfortable with, or play a route that they're comfortable with, and that's fine. But as you play the keys more and more, you begin to understand what all the mobs do, what needs kicking, what needs stopping, what needs focusing, what needs killing early, and so on. If you feel confident enough, or if you feel like your group's going to particularly pay attention, maybe you've been playing with the same pug for a few keys in a row and you find they're particularly good, maybe just set up some markers on some hotkeys, so you can have one hotkey for a moon, one hotkey for a triangle, and so on, and mark the individual mobs that need kicking going into each pack, and have it pre-assigned for someone kicking each individual color. So if you have a hunter in your group, say the hunter's going to be kicking green, mage can be kicking moon, and rogue can be kicking star, for example. And just little things like that can make a huge difference when it comes to a lot of the keys in Shadowlands, because there's a lot of incredibly dangerous interrupts that need to be taken care of, especially in a key like Spires. But that is just a little aside. Don't expect the tank to take agency over everything on in your keys, pug or not pug. It's not always just up to the tank. Try and put a little bit of effort in yourself as well, and you'll go really far. You'll go really far. All groups really need is a little bit of coordination, and keys suddenly become a lot easier. That was just something I wanted to throw in real fast. I feel like it's worth mentioning, because I think too many people are too reliant on someone else doing the work and trying to set everything up.
It's really good to spread up like the work as well. What I've done previously when I push keys is that one person will maybe control the stuns, etc., and one will control interrupts, or one will control externals, etc. So you're basically splitting the job up, because if one person has to focus on calling everything and doing everything, they are more likely than not to be able to like make mistakes or forgetting to call in like dangerous situations. So by splitting it up, there's less to think about, and it just makes it overall easier for your group. So I definitely agree. Like putting all of your groups, but how you're gonna go into the dungeon on one person is not really the play. Putting it up and splitting it up into the group is
especially in Shadowlands right now, where being a tank in Shadowlands dungeons is probably the hardest job that I've seen in keys ever. Like I get that in season 4 in BFA it was relatively straightforward because of an absolute metric ton of versatility, which made surviving very, very easy even for the least experienced of tanks. But now there's a lot that just shreds your tank, and they need to concentrate on what they're doing. So having them coordinate everything at the same time is a monumental effort, which if you can relieve some of the burden off of them, your tank's going to play better, and again, keys will just become a lot easier overall. But that's just my 2 cents at the end of Spires. I did want to mention it in Spires specifically because of the fact that there are so many kicks that are important to take across the key. It's definitely worthwhile doing. But is there anything else that either of you wanted to mention about Spires in particular?
Not really. As mentioned, like most of them all were pretty similar. Like you are basically just running through the first 80% playing against the same mobs. So it is basically just learning what interrupts are important, learning how to deal with the packs, etc., how you deal with this dungeon. The mobs themselves are pretty similar.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.